The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I watched Claire lean closer to my brother Ryan at our father's 60th birthday celebration. Her laugh rang out across the crowded community center, bright and theatrical, while her perfectly manicured fingers traced circles on his forearm. What should have been a moment of family joy had twisted into something that made my stomach clench with dread. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months ago, I thought I was being the perfect sister and friend by introducing them. Claire had been complaining about Portland's dating scene for weeks, and Ryan had just ended a 2-year relationship with his ex-girlfriend. It seemed like fate when Claire mentioned she'd always been attracted to creative types, and Ryan was certainly that, a talented graphic designer who spent his weekends capturing the Pacific Northwest's beauty through his camera lens. Now, watching her perform what looked more like a calculated seduction than genuine affection, I realized I might have made the biggest mistake of my life. The evening had started so differently. I'd spent hours helping my mother Patricia transform the Riverside Community Center into something worthy of celebrating my father's 6 decades on Earth. Golden streamers caught the overhead lights, and photo displays chronicled Dad's journey from young engineer to devoted family man. The whole Parker clan had gathered: aunts, uncles, cousins who'd driven up from California, and longtime family friends who'd watched Ryan and me grow up in this tight-knit community. I'd felt proud watching everyone mingle, sharing stories about Dad's impact on their lives. He'd been the kind of man who fixed neighbors, fences without being asked, and coached Little League for 12 years straight, even after Ryan and I had aged out of the program. This celebration was supposed to honor all of that goodness. Claire had arrived fashionably late, which I'd expected. She always made entrances, sweeping into rooms like she was gracing everyone with her presence. Tonight she'd chosen a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair perfectly, and I'd watched several heads turn as she navigated through the crowd toward our family's reserved tables near the front of the hall. My brother looked handsome in his navy blazer, more polished than his usual flannel and jeans uniform. At 31, Ryan had inherited our father's steady demeanor and our mother's warm smile. He'd been talking with our cousin Jake about a freelance project when Claire approached, and I'd felt a flutter of anticipation watching them reconnect. They'd met twice before, once at my apartment during a casual dinner party, and again at a group outing to the Saturday market downtown. Both times, their interaction had seemed natural and promising. Claire had asked thoughtful questions about his photography, and Ryan had appeared genuinely interested in her travel blog and social media work. I'd congratulated myself on what seemed like a perfect match. But something about tonight felt different. Claire's attention seemed more intense, more focused than before. She positioned herself strategically, always within Ryan's line of sight, laughing at his comments with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to his typically dry humor. When he excused himself to help Dad set up the slideshow presentation, she found reasons to follow, offering assistance that kept her hovering nearby. The first real warning sign came during dinner. I'd been seated between my Aunt Helen and my coworker Nicole, who'd become close enough to be included in family celebrations. Claire had somehow maneuvered herself into the seat directly across from Ryan, despite the carefully planned seating chart Mom had agonized over for weeks. Throughout the meal, Claire dominated the conversation at our table, steering every topic back to herself, or finding ways to highlight shared interests with my brother. When Dad's longtime colleague mentioned his recent hiking trip to Mount Hood, Claire immediately launched into stories about her own outdoor adventures, emphasizing her love for nature photography and how she'd always wanted to learn from someone truly talented. Ryan, being naturally modest, deflected her compliments, but I could see he was flattered. My brother had always been the quieter Parker sibling, more comfortable behind his camera than in front of crowds. Claire's focused attention was probably intoxicating for someone who'd spent most of his dating life with women who didn't fully appreciate his artistic side. Nicole caught my eye during one of Claire's more elaborate storytelling moments and raised an eyebrow. She'd known Claire almost as long as I had, and while she'd never voiced direct criticism, I'd sensed her reservations about my friend's tendency toward dramatic behavior and self-promotion. The real shift happened during Dad's speech. He'd stood at the front of the room, looking distinguished despite his nervousness about public speaking, and began thanking everyone for sharing this milestone with him. It was a heartfelt moment, talking about the importance of family and community, the values he'd tried to instill in Ryan and me, and his gratitude for a life filled with meaningful relationships. While everyone else was focused on Dad's words, I noticed Claire wasn't really listening. Instead, she was studying Ryan's profile, watching his emotional response to our father's speech. When Dad mentioned being proud of his son's artistic achievements and hoping Ryan would find someone who truly appreciated his talents, Claire's expression sharpened with what looked like calculation rather than sentiment. After the formal presentations ended and people began mingling again, Claire's behavior became even more pronounced. She seemed to appear wherever Ryan went, whether he was talking with old family friends or helping clean up empty plates. Her questions became more personal, probing into his future plans, his living situation, his thoughts about settling down. I tried to dismiss my growing unease as protective sister instincts. Maybe I was being overly sensitive because Ryan had been hurt by his previous relationship ending. His ex-girlfriend had been critical of his career choice, constantly pushing him to find something more financially stable than freelance design work. She'd never understood that creativity wasn't just Ryan's job, it was his identity. Claire seemed to understand this about him, or at least she was performing understanding convincingly. She asked to see his portfolio on his phone, praising his composition and use of natural light. She mentioned wanting to collaborate on content for her blog, suggesting they could explore some of the hidden gems around Portland together. The evening's final moment of celebration came when Mom brought out the photo cake she'd ordered from Ryan's favorite bakery. It featured an edible reproduction of one of his landscape photographs, a stunning shot of Multnomah Falls that had won a local contest last year. The gesture clearly moved Ryan, and I felt my heart warm watching him hug our parents with genuine emotion. But even this touching family moment felt tainted by Claire's presence. She positioned herself for the family photos, managing to appear in several shots despite not being an actual family member. When Ryan mentioned the story behind the waterfall photograph, she hung on every word, asking detailed questions about his equipment and technique with an intensity that seemed performative. As the evening wound down and people began saying their goodbyes, I helped Mom pack up leftover decorations and food. The community center slowly emptied, leaving just our immediate family and a few close friends to handle the cleanup. Ryan was loading folding chairs onto a cart when Claire approached him one final time. I was across the room, wrapping up leftover cake, but their body language was impossible to miss. Claire stood closer than necessary, her hand resting on his arm while she spoke in low, intimate tones. Whatever she was saying made Ryan smile, though he looked slightly overwhelmed by her attention. When they finally separated, Claire walked over to where I was packing up serving dishes. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was something triumphant in her expression that made me pause in my work. "Thank you so much for tonight, Lisa," she said, her voice carrying a breathless quality. "Your family is absolutely wonderful, and Ryan is just incredible." I had no idea how talented and sensitive he really is. Something in her phrasing bothered me, though I couldn't articulate exactly what. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself," I replied carefully. "Dad was really happy to have everyone here." Claire glanced back toward Ryan, who was now helping Dad load sound equipment into their car. "You know, I was thinking Ryan and I should spend more time together, really get to know each other properly. There's something special between us. I can feel it." The certainty in her voice was unsettling. They'd spent one evening together at a family function, yet she was speaking as if they'd developed some deep connection. "Claire, maybe you should take things slowly. Ryan's still getting over his last relationship, and—" "Oh, Lisa," she interrupted, her laugh sounding forced. "You worry too much. Trust me, I know what I'm doing when it comes to men like Ryan. He needs someone who really sees his potential, someone who can appreciate everything he has to offer." The way she said "men like Ryan" made my skin crawl, as if my brother was a type to be managed rather than a person to be known. But before I could respond, Nicole appeared beside us with a stack of dirty plates, breaking the moment. "Ready to head out?" Nicole asked, looking between Claire and me with obvious curiosity about the tension she'd walked into. Claire immediately brightened, switching back to her public persona. "Absolutely. This was such a perfect evening. Lisa, thank your parents again for including me. And tell Ryan I'm looking forward to our coffee date tomorrow." "Coffee date tomorrow?" I looked at her sharply. "What coffee date?" "Oh, didn't he mention it?" We're meeting at Brew and Bean downtown at 10. He's going to show me some of his recent work, and I thought I might pick his brain about photography techniques for my blog content. This was the first I'd heard of any such plan, and something about the casual way she announced it felt wrong. Ryan typically mentioned his plans, especially when they involved people I'd introduced him to. The fact that he hadn't said anything about coffee with Claire seemed unusual. Nicole and I exchanged glances, and I could see my own concern reflected in her expression. Claire seemed oblivious to our reaction, or maybe she simply didn't care. She gathered her purse and sweater, hugged me goodbye with theatrical warmth, and glided out of the community center with the satisfied air of someone who'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. After she left, Nicole helped me finish packing the remaining items in unusual silence. Finally, as we loaded the last box into my car, she spoke up. "Is it just me, or was Claire's behavior tonight a little intense?" I felt relieved that someone else had noticed. She was definitely focused on Ryan. "Focused is one word for it," Nicole said dryly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It felt more like she was studying him, taking notes for some kind of project. Her observation crystallized something I'd been struggling to name all evening. Claire hadn't been getting to know Ryan as much as she'd been collecting information about him. Every question, every compliment, every moment of rapt attention had felt calculated rather than genuine. But what could I do with this suspicion? Claire was my friend, and Ryan was an adult who could make his own decisions about whom to date. Maybe I was being overly protective, because I'd seen him hurt before. Maybe Claire's intensity was just her way of showing interest, and I was reading too much into normal dating behavior. As I drove home through Portland's quiet late-night streets, I tried to convince myself that my worries were unfounded. Claire could be dramatic and self-centered, but that didn't necessarily make her malicious. Perhaps she genuinely liked Ryan, and was simply pursuing him with her typical enthusiasm. But deep in my chest, a cold knot of dread was already forming, warning me that this situation was heading somewhere dangerous for everyone involved. I just had no idea how right my instincts were, or how much damage would be done before the truth finally came to light. The next morning, I woke up with the same unsettled feeling that had followed me home from the party. My small apartment in northwest Portland felt unusually quiet as I made coffee and tried to shake off the previous evening's strange energy. Sunlight streamed through my living room windows, illuminating the framed photos of family and friends that covered my bookshelf, including several pictures of Claire and me from various adventures over our 3-year friendship. Looking at those images now, I found myself studying Claire's expression in each one, searching for clues I might have missed about her character. In most of the photos, she was smiling directly at the camera, perfectly posed and aware of being photographed. Even in candid moments, she seemed to be performing for some invisible audience. Had she always been this way, and I'd simply been too close to notice? Or was something different about her recent behavior that I couldn't quite identify? My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Thanks for last night." Dad seemed really happy with how everything turned out. I typed back. He was thrilled. Everyone had a great time. I waited, hoping he might mention his plans with Claire, but no follow-up message came. This silence felt significant, though I couldn't decide if it meant something was wrong or if I was simply overthinking the situation. Around noon, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to walk downtown to run some errands, deliberately choosing a route that would take me past Brew and Bean. I told myself I wasn't spying, just happening to be in the neighborhood, but I knew I was lying to myself. The coffee shop sat on a busy corner in Portland's Pearl District, its large windows offering clear views of the interior. As I approached, I could see Ryan and Claire seated at a small table near the back, Ryan's laptop open between them while Claire leaned in close to examine whatever he was showing her. From the sidewalk, the scene looked innocent enough. 2 people having coffee, looking at a computer screen, engaged in what appeared to be friendly conversation. But something about Claire's body language bothered me. She was positioned so that she was almost pressed against Ryan's side, her hand resting on his shoulder while she pointed at his screen. It was more intimate than seemed necessary for a casual coffee meeting between new acquaintances. I forced myself to keep walking, feeling guilty for even looking. Ryan was entitled to his privacy, and Claire had every right to pursue him if she was genuinely interested. My role as the person who'd introduced them didn't give me any special authority over their relationship. But the image of them together stayed with me throughout the afternoon, adding to the collection of small details that were building into a larger picture I didn't want to acknowledge. Something about this whole situation felt orchestrated, rather than organic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my family was somehow being drawn into something we didn't fully understand. Over the following weeks, Claire began weaving herself into our family's fabric with a precision that should have alarmed me sooner. What started as casual coffee meetings with Ryan evolved into elaborate dinner dates at Portland's most expensive restaurants, weekend photography expeditions to the Columbia River Gorge, and late-night conversations that kept my brother glued to his phone with an intensity I'd never seen before. The transformation in Ryan was immediate and dramatic. My typically reserved brother, who usually required weeks to warm up to new people, was suddenly gushing about Claire's creative vision and artistic sensibilities. She'd convinced him that her lifestyle blog needed professional photography, and he'd thrown himself into the project with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. I learned about most of these developments secondhand, through my mother's concerned phone calls and Nicole's observations when we grabbed lunch downtown. Mom mentioned seeing Ryan's car parked outside Claire's apartment building at all hours, and Nicole had spotted them at 3 different upscale restaurants in the span of 10 days, always with Claire examining expensive wine lists while Ryan looked slightly overwhelmed by the atmosphere. The financial aspect particularly worried me. Ryan's freelance income fluctuated dramatically from month to month, and I knew he'd been struggling since losing a major client earlier in the year. His ex-girlfriend's constant criticism about his career instability had left him sensitive about money, yet here he was apparently funding elaborate dates with someone who seemed to have expensive tastes. When I finally saw them together again, it was at our family's monthly dinner at Mom and Dad's house in Beaverton. Claire had somehow secured an invitation, arriving with a bouquet of expensive orchids for my mother and a bottle of aged whiskey for my father. Her charm offensive was flawless, complimenting Mom's cooking with specific references to techniques and ingredients that demonstrated she'd done her homework about our family's preferences. But it was her interaction with Ryan that truly disturbed me. She'd positioned herself as his artistic collaborator and business advisor, speaking about their projects with a proprietary tone that made it sound like they were already partners in more than just creative endeavors. Throughout dinner, she peppered the conversation with casual references to their shared experiences, inside jokes from their photography expeditions, and future plans that seemed to assume a level of commitment that made my parents exchange meaningful glances across the table. Ryan appeared completely captivated. He hung on her every word, sought her approval for his comments, and deferred to her opinions about everything from restaurant choices to weekend activities. This wasn't the confident, independent brother I'd known for 31 years. This was someone who'd been systematically convinced that his judgment was inferior to hers. The most unsettling moment came when Dad asked about Ryan's current projects. Instead of letting my brother answer, Claire launched into a detailed explanation of how she was helping him rebrand his photography business, complete with social media strategies and client acquisition techniques she'd learned from her influencer work. She spoke about Ryan's talent with the breathless enthusiasm of someone who discovered a hidden treasure, but her language revealed an underlying belief that his potential could only be realized through her guidance. "Ryan has such an incredible eye," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "But he's been hiding his light under a bushel for too long. I'm helping him understand his true worth, showing him how to market himself properly and charge what his work is actually worth." My father nodded politely, but I caught the slight frown that crossed his features when Claire mentioned proper marketing and true worth. Dad had always valued Ryan's artistic integrity over commercial success, and I suspected he was uncomfortable with the implication that my brother needed outside validation to recognize his own talents. After dinner, while Claire helped Mom in the kitchen with obvious eagerness to ingratiate herself further, I found myself alone with Ryan on the back patio, where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. The familiar setting made his transformation even more jarring. "You seem really happy," I said carefully, hoping to draw him into genuine conversation about what was happening. Ryan's face lit up with an intensity that was both wonderful and concerning. Lisa, I can't even begin to explain what Claire has brought to my life. She sees things in my work that I never noticed myself. She's got connections in the social media world that could completely change my career trajectory. The phrase career trajectory sounded foreign coming from my brother, who'd always been more interested in capturing perfect moments than building strategic professional networks. That's great, but I hope you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to change everything at once. Change is exactly what I needed, he said, his voice carrying an edge of defensiveness that surprised me. I've been stuck in the same patterns for years, playing it safe, not pushing myself to grow. Claire's helping me see that I've been limiting my own potential. These words sounded rehearsed, as if he was repeating arguments someone else had made to convince him of his own inadequacy. The Ryan I knew had never been dissatisfied with his artistic journey or felt limited by his own choices. He'd always been thoughtful about his creative development, preferring organic growth over forced transformation. Just make sure you're making changes because they feel right to you, not because someone else thinks you should, I said gently. Ryan's expression hardened slightly. Claire's not just someone else, Lisa. She understands me in ways that most people don't. She appreciates what I'm trying to accomplish with my art. The implications stung. Ryan was essentially telling me that Claire understood him better than his own family did, that her recent arrival in his life had revealed insights we'd somehow missed despite knowing him for decades. This kind of isolation from family and friends was exactly what I'd witnessed in other relationships, where one partner systematically undermined the other's existing support system. Our conversation was interrupted when Claire appeared in the doorway, her timing so perfect it felt calculated. "There you are," she said to Ryan, though her eyes were fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your mom wants to show me those photo albums from your college years." Ryan immediately stood to join her, leaving me alone on the patio with a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my brother. For the first time in our lives, I felt like an outsider looking in on his world, and Claire seemed to be the gatekeeper controlling access. The photo album session inside provided another glimpse into Claire's methodical approach to inserting herself into our family narrative. I watched through the sliding glass door as she examined pictures from Ryan's college years with intense focus, asking detailed questions about his friends, his interests, his romantic history. Mom, clearly delighted by this apparent interest in her son's past, was providing comprehensive commentary about each phase of Ryan's development. What struck me as particularly manipulative was how Claire positioned these questions. Rather than seeming nosy or invasive, her curiosity appeared to spring from deep affection and a desire to understand every aspect of Ryan's journey. She was gathering intelligence while performing the role of devoted girlfriend, and my parents were unwittingly providing her with a complete psychological profile of my brother's vulnerabilities and insecurities. When I rejoined the group inside, Claire was studying a photo from Ryan's high school graduation, where he looked awkward and uncomfortable in his formal clothes. "You were so serious," she said to him with apparent fondness. "I bet you were one of those deep, thoughtful teenagers who felt like nobody really understood you." The accuracy of this observation was unsettling. Ryan had indeed been a solitary, introspective teenager who'd struggled with social confidence. But hearing Claire articulate this with such precision, based on a single photograph and one evening of family stories, felt like watching someone solve a puzzle in real time. Ryan looked pleased by her insight, but I felt chilled by the calculating nature of her attention. She wasn't just getting to know my brother, she was studying him, identifying the emotional buttons that would make him most responsive to her influence. The evening ended with Claire accepting my mother's invitation to join us for our family's annual camping trip to Crater Lake, an invitation that had been extended before anyone could properly consider the implications. This trip was a sacred Parker family tradition, a long weekend every summer where we disconnected from technology and reconnected with each other around campfires and hiking trails. The idea of Claire inserting herself into this intimate family ritual filled me with dread, but Ryan was obviously thrilled. As they said their goodbyes, I heard him telling her about the best sunrise photography spots around the lake, already planning how to incorporate her presence into an experience that had always been about family bonding rather than romantic partnerships. After they left, Mom and I cleaned up the dinner dishes in contemplative silence. Finally, she spoke up with the careful tone she used when broaching sensitive family topics. "Claire seems very fond of Ryan." I nodded, unsure how to articulate my concerns without sounding jealous or overprotective. "She does seem quite interested in him." "Perhaps too interested," Mom said quietly, confirming that I wasn't the only one who'd noticed something excessive about Claire's attention. "There's something almost desperate about the way she's pursuing this relationship. Like she's trying to prove something rather than simply enjoying getting to know him." This observation crystallized something I'd been struggling to identify. Claire's behavior didn't have the natural rhythm of someone falling in love. It had the urgency of someone executing a plan, racing against some invisible deadline to secure Ryan's commitment before he could think too clearly about what was happening. Over the next 2 weeks, my concerns deepened as I watched Claire's integration into Ryan's life accelerate beyond any reasonable pace for a new relationship. She'd convinced him to give her a key to his apartment, citing the practical benefits of coordinating their photography projects. She'd begun answering his phone when he was busy editing, speaking to his clients with a familiarity that suggested a level of involvement that should have taken months to develop. Most troubling was how she'd begun to isolate him from his existing friendships and routines. Marcus Thompson, Ryan's best friend since college, mentioned to me that my brother had canceled their weekly basketball games 3 times in a row, claiming he had important projects to work on with Claire. The hiking group Ryan had belonged to for years hadn't seen him in weeks. Even his relationship with our parents was becoming filtered through Claire's presence, as if she was gradually positioning herself as the primary conduit for family communication. Nicole pointed out something else I'd missed during one of our lunch meetings downtown. She'd been following Claire's social media accounts and noticed a disturbing pattern in how she was documenting her relationship with Ryan. Rather than posting the casual, candid moments most couples shared online, Claire's content felt staged and performative. Every photo seemed designed to communicate specific messages about their relationship status, their lifestyle, their apparent compatibility. She'd created a narrative about finding her creative soulmate, complete with carefully curated images of them working together on artistic projects, exploring Portland's cultural venues, and enjoying expensive dining experiences. But what disturbed Nicole most was how one-sided this documentation appeared to be. While Claire was broadcasting their relationship to her followers with increasing intensity, Ryan barely appeared on his own social media accounts anymore. It was as if his individual identity was being gradually absorbed into Claire's public persona, reducing him to a supporting character in her personal brand narrative. The final warning sign came when I discovered Claire had been researching our family's financial situation with a thoroughness that went far beyond casual curiosity about her boyfriend's background. This revelation emerged during an uncomfortable conversation with my Aunt Helen, who mentioned that Claire had asked detailed questions about Dad's engineering career, our family's property holdings, and Ryan's likely inheritance prospects during a chance encounter at the farmer's market. Aunt Helen had found these questions inappropriate but hadn't wanted to create family drama by mentioning them sooner. Now, seeing my obvious distress at this information, she wished she'd spoken up immediately. The idea that Claire was conducting financial reconnaissance on my family while simultaneously playing the role of devoted girlfriend was horrifying. Combined with her systematic isolation of Ryan from his existing support system and her calculated integration into our family dynamics, a picture was emerging of someone with motives that extended far beyond romantic interest. I realized I needed to act quickly before Claire's influence became so entrenched that reversing it would require destroying Ryan's trust in his own judgment. But confronting him directly seemed likely to backfire, given how thoroughly she'd convinced him that she understood him better than anyone else ever had. Instead, I decided to do some investigation of my own, starting with the discrepancies I'd noticed between Claire's public persona and her actual circumstances. If she was manipulating my brother for financial gain, there had to be evidence of her real situation that contradicted the successful influencer image she was projecting. What I discovered in the following days would prove that my instincts about Claire had been not just correct, but devastatingly inadequate to the scope of her deception. My investigation into Claire's background began with the kind of basic online research that anyone could do, but quickly revealed inconsistencies that made my stomach turn. Her lifestyle blog, which she'd positioned as a successful venture requiring professional photography, had fewer than 2,000 followers and hadn't generated any sponsored content in over 6 months. The expensive restaurants and cultural events she documented so meticulously were always tagged with vague location references rather than specific establishments, suggesting she might be recycling content from other sources or staging photos to appear more affluent than she actually was. Her apartment, which Ryan had described as a stylish downtown loft perfect for creative collaboration, turned out to be a cramped studio in a converted warehouse building known for housing struggling artists and recent college graduates. I discovered this when Nicole and I decided to drive by the address after work, ostensibly to explore a neighborhood we'd never visited. The building's exterior was run down, with peeling paint and windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. More disturbing was what I learned from Stephanie Walsh, Claire's roommate, during a carefully orchestrated accidental encounter at the grocery store. Stephanie seemed eager to talk, as if she'd been hoping someone would ask questions about Claire's recent behavior. According to her, Claire had been behind on rent for 3 months and had been desperately seeking ways to improve her financial situation without actually finding traditional employment. Stephanie mentioned that Claire had been studying Ryan's social media presence obsessively for weeks before their official introduction, taking screenshots of his posts and researching details about his family and career. She'd apparently spent hours analyzing his photography style and learning enough technical terminology to sound knowledgeable during conversations about his work. Most chilling was Stephanie's revelation that Claire had explicitly stated her intention to land a financially stable boyfriend before her lease renewal in August. She'd created what amounted to a strategic plan for targeting men who appeared successful but emotionally vulnerable, focusing on artists and creative professionals who might be susceptible to flattery about their underappreciated talents. Ryan, with his recent breakup and his family's comfortable middle-class background, had apparently represented an ideal target. Claire had researched our father's engineering career and discovered that he owned the family home outright, had a solid pension, and had likely accumulated substantial assets over his 40-year career. She'd calculated that Ryan, as the only son, would eventually inherit a significant portion of this wealth. This revelation made me physically ill. Claire wasn't just manipulating my brother's emotions, she was conducting a long-term financial scam that treated our entire family as marks in an elaborate con game. Every conversation about his artistic potential, every intimate moment they'd shared, every integration into our family dynamics had been calculated moves designed to position herself for maximum economic benefit. But knowing this information and proving it to Ryan were entirely different challenges. He was so deeply invested in believing Claire's version of their relationship that presenting him with contrary evidence would likely backfire. She'd already established herself as the person who truly understood him, which meant any criticism from family members could be framed as jealousy or misunderstanding of their special connection. I decided to document everything I'd learned while looking for opportunities to expose Claire's deception in a way that would be undeniable. The perfect opportunity came sooner than expected, in the form of the family camping trip to Crater Lake that was now just 2 weeks away. Claire had been preparing for this trip with an intensity that should have raised red flags for everyone involved. She'd purchased expensive camping gear despite claiming she was an experienced outdoorswoman, had researched the area's photography opportunities with obsessive thoroughness, and had begun making suggestions about group activities and meal planning, as if she were a longtime family member, rather than a recent addition to Ryan's life. More concerning was how she'd begun positioning this trip as a milestone moment in their relationship. During a family dinner planning session, she'd made several references to it being a chance for her to, really become part of the Parker family, and had hinted that she and Ryan might have important news to share after the weekend. The implication that Ryan might be considering a proposal after less than 2 months of dating was terrifying. If Claire succeeded in securing an engagement, extricating her from our family would become exponentially more difficult, and the financial damage she could inflict would escalate dramatically. I knew I had to act before the camping trip, but I needed concrete evidence that would be impossible for Ryan to dismiss or rationalize. That evidence came from an unexpected source: Claire herself. Nicole had maintained her surveillance of Claire's social media activity and noticed that she'd begun posting content that didn't align with her supposed lifestyle. Photos of expensive meals were being posted from her apartment rather than restaurants, suggesting she was ordering delivery food and staging it to appear as if she were dining out regularly. Her captions about romantic dates with Ryan were often posted at times when Nicole had confirmed he was working late in his studio across town. Most revealing was a series of posts about her, quote, successful photography collaboration with a talented artist that used photos Ryan had taken during their expeditions but credited her as the creative director. She was essentially stealing his work to enhance her professional reputation while positioning herself as the creative force behind their partnership. This discovery gave me an idea for exposing Claire's deception in a way that would be undeniable. If she was willing to steal Ryan's creative work for her personal brand, she would likely reveal other aspects of her manipulative behavior when placed in situations where she felt comfortable and unobserved. I decided to arrange a scenario where I could record Claire speaking candidly about her relationship with Ryan, ideally in a context where she might reveal her true motivations. The opportunity came when she mentioned wanting to meet for coffee to discuss potential wedding planning ideas, apparently confident enough in her control over Ryan to begin making long-term assumptions about their future. We met at a small cafe in Southeast Portland, far from anywhere our family might accidentally encounter us. Claire arrived looking polished and confident, clearly viewing this as an opportunity to solidify her position within our family structure. She'd brought a notebook filled with ideas for engagement parties and wedding venues, despite the fact that Ryan had never mentioned any intention to propose. I started the conversation by expressing enthusiasm for their relationship and asking about her long-term plans with my brother. This approach seemed to relax her guard, and she began speaking more openly about her strategies for managing Ryan's career and their shared future. The thing about men like Ryan, she said, stirring her latte with calculated casualness, is that they need someone who can see their potential and help them achieve it. He's incredibly talented, but he's been held back by lack of confidence and poor business instincts. I'm helping him understand his true value. I nodded encouragingly while discreetly activating the voice recording app on my phone. It's wonderful that you recognize his talents. Oh, I recognize them immediately, Claire continued, her voice taking on a slightly predatory tone. The moment I saw his work, I knew he could be something special with the right guidance. Artists like him need partners who understand both the creative side and the business side. They need someone who can protect them from their own self-limiting beliefs. The way she spoke about Ryan as if he were a project to be managed rather than a person to be loved was chilling, but I kept my expression neutral and encouraging. You've certainly helped him become more confident. Claire smiled with obvious satisfaction. Confidence is just the beginning. I'm helping him restructure his entire approach to his career. Better pricing, better marketing, better client relationships. Within a year, I'll have him earning 3 times what he made before we met. That sounds ambitious, I said carefully. What if he's not comfortable with such dramatic changes? That's the beauty of our relationship, Claire replied, her voice carrying a note of smugness that made my skin crawl. I've become so important to his emotional well-being that he trusts my judgment completely. When someone feels truly understood and appreciated for the first time, they become very open to guidance from the person who gave them that gift. The calculated nature of her emotional manipulation was becoming clearer with every sentence. She wasn't helping Ryan build confidence. She was creating emotional dependency that made him more susceptible to her control. This wasn't love or partnership. It was a systematic psychological campaign designed to extract maximum value from his vulnerability. What about his family? I asked. How do you see yourself fitting into the Parker family dynamics long term? Claire's expression shifted slightly, revealing a flash of something cold and calculating. Ryan's family is lovely, but they've never really understood his potential. They've been content to let him drift along as a small-time photographer, instead of encouraging him to think bigger. I think once they see how much happier and more successful he becomes with my support, they'll be grateful for what I've brought to his life. The arrogance was breathtaking. Claire was essentially dismissing our family's love and support for Ryan while positioning herself as his savior. She'd convinced herself that we'd failed him in some way that only she could remedy, giving her permission to systematically isolate him from the relationships that had sustained him throughout his life. His parents seem very proud of his work, I said, testing her reaction. Pride is nice, but practical support is better, Claire replied dismissively. I mean, look at his living situation. He's 31 years old, living in a tiny apartment, driving a 10-year-old car, struggling to make rent some months. That's not the kind of life someone with his talents should be living. This criticism of Ryan's lifestyle revealed the depth of her financial motivations. She wasn't interested in him as he was. She was interested in transforming him into someone who could provide the affluent lifestyle she craved. His artistic integrity and personal contentment were irrelevant compared to his potential earning capacity under her management. What are your plans for changing that? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Claire leaned forward conspiratorially, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share her strategic thinking. Well, obviously we'll need to move in together soon, probably to a place that's more suitable for our professional collaboration. Something downtown with better lighting and space for photo shoots, and I think it makes sense for us to combine our resources, you know? I can handle the business side of his career while he focuses on the creative work. The idea of Claire gaining access to Ryan's finances was terrifying, especially given what I now knew about her actual financial situation. She was essentially planning to use his resources to fund the lifestyle she'd been faking on social media, while positioning this arrangement as beneficial for his career development. That sounds like a big step, I said. Have you discussed this with Ryan? We've touched on it, she replied vaguely. I think the camping trip will be a perfect opportunity to have more serious conversations about our future. Being away from all the distractions, surrounded by nature, focusing on what really matters, it's the ideal setting for making important decisions. The implication was clear. Claire was planning to use the family camping trip as an opportunity to secure some form of commitment from Ryan, possibly even a proposal. She'd orchestrated her inclusion in this sacred family tradition specifically to leverage the emotional weight of the moment for her own purposes. Our conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Claire revealed additional details about her manipulation tactics and long-term financial expectations. She spoke about Ryan's family assets with knowledge that she could only have gained through systematic research, mentioned specific dollar amounts related to our father's pension and property values, and discussed her plans for influencing Ryan's relationship with his parents to ensure favorable inheritance arrangements. By the time we parted ways, I had recorded over an hour of Claire's candid admissions about her calculated approach to their relationship, her financial motivations, and her systematic efforts to isolate Ryan from his family. The evidence was undeniable and devastating, but I still faced the challenge of presenting it to my brother in a way that would break through the psychological manipulation she'd used to control his perception of reality. The camping trip was now just 1 week away, and I knew I had to act quickly before Claire could execute whatever plans she'd made for that weekend. But I also knew that confronting Ryan directly with this information might backfire spectacularly if he wasn't psychologically prepared to hear the truth about the woman he believed understood him better than anyone else ever had. I spent the next several days developing a strategy that would expose Claire's deception in the most undeniable way possible, while protecting Ryan from the devastating psychological damage that would inevitably follow his realization that everything he believed about their relationship had been an elaborate lie designed to exploit his vulnerabilities for financial gain. The morning of our family's departure to Crater Lake arrived with unseasonable clouds hanging over Portland, casting everything in an ominous gray light that matched my mood perfectly. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with how to expose Claire's deception without completely destroying Ryan's trust in his own judgment. The recording from our coffee meeting burned like a secret in my phone, but I knew that simply playing it for him would likely backfire in spectacular fashion. Claire had done too thorough a job of positioning herself as his emotional anchor and creative muse. A direct attack on her character would probably be interpreted as jealousy or family interference, driving him deeper into her web of manipulation rather than freeing him from it. I needed a more sophisticated approach, one that would allow Ryan to discover the truth naturally rather than having it forced upon him. My strategy crystallized around the camping trip itself. If Claire was planning to use this weekend to secure some form of commitment from Ryan, she would likely reveal her true nature when she felt most confident and secure. Away from the performance pressures of city life and surrounded by what she assumed was a captive audience of Ryan's family, she might drop enough of her carefully constructed mask to expose herself. I arrived at my parents' house in Beaverton at 7 in the morning to help load the camping equipment into Dad's SUV and Mom's sedan. The familiar ritual of checking sleeping bags, camp stoves, and coolers usually filled me with anticipation for our annual family retreat. This year, the preparations felt more like battle preparations. Ryan pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later with Claire in his passenger seat, both of them looking disgustingly cheerful and coordinated in matching hiking boots and outdoor gear that appeared to have been purchased specifically for this trip. Claire had clearly invested significant money in creating the appearance of an experienced outdoors woman, complete with a professional-grade backpack and camping accessories that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly rent. She bounded out of the car with theatrical enthusiasm, immediately rushing to help Mom organize the food supplies while gushing about how excited she was to experience this sacred Parker family tradition. Her performance was flawless, striking exactly the right balance between eager participation and respectful deference to our established routines. But I caught something in her expression when she thought no one was looking, a calculating assessment of our family dynamics and camping setup that reminded me of someone evaluating assets rather than preparing for a recreational weekend. She was still working, still positioning herself for maximum advantage, even in this supposedly relaxed family context. The 2-hour drive to Crater Lake passed with Claire maintaining her enthusiastic girlfriend persona while gradually steering conversations toward topics that would showcase her compatibility with our family values. She asked thoughtful questions about Dad's engineering career, praised Mom's organizational skills, and made references to shared experiences with Ryan that positioned them as an established couple despite their brief actual history together. Most unsettling was how she'd begun using possessive language about Ryan without him seeming to notice. She referred to our photography projects and our creative partnership and our plans for the fall, with a casual ownership that suggested their relationship was far more established than it actually was. Ryan nodded along with these references as if they'd been discussed and agreed upon, but I suspected Claire was actually planting ideas rather than reflecting existing agreements. When we reached the rim of Crater Lake, the afternoon sun had burned through the morning clouds to reveal the stunning deep blue water that made this destination so special for our family. Claire immediately began photographing everything with her phone, not for the artistic value, but clearly for social media content that would document her inclusion in this intimate family tradition. Ryan, meanwhile, was setting up his professional camera equipment with the focused intensity that always accompanied his serious photography work. This was where he came alive, where his artistic vision transformed ordinary moments into something transcendent. Watching him work in this environment reminded me why protecting him from Claire's manipulation mattered so much, not just for his financial security, but for the preservation of his creative soul. Claire positioned herself as Ryan's assistant and creative consultant, offering suggestions about composition and lighting with an authority that should have taken years to develop. She'd clearly studied his techniques intensively, but her comments revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what drove his artistic choices. Where Ryan saw emotional resonance and natural beauty, Claire saw marketable content and social media potential. The first crack in her facade appeared during our campsite setup. Dad had reserved our usual spot near the lake shore, a secluded area that required carrying equipment down a steep, rocky trail. Claire had not anticipated this level of physical challenge, despite her claims of extensive outdoor experience. Her expensive gear proved impractical for actual camping conditions, and her enthusiasm began to waver as she struggled with tasks that the rest of us handled routinely. More revealing was how she responded to this unexpected difficulty. Instead of admitting her inexperience or asking for help, she began making subtle criticisms of our camping arrangements. The site was too remote, the trail too dangerous, the facilities too primitive for someone accustomed to more comfortable accommodations. These complaints contradicted everything she'd said about loving outdoor adventures and being excited to rough it with our family. Ryan, typically generous and protective, immediately began accommodating her discomfort by offering to carry her equipment and suggesting modifications to our planned activities. But I could see confusion in his expression as Claire's behavior diverged from the adventurous, low-maintenance persona she'd presented during their previous outdoor excursions. The evening campfire provided the perfect setting for my plan to expose Claire's true motivations. I brought a portable speaker and suggested we listen to music while we cooked dinner, creating ambient noise that would make private conversations feel more natural. Then I began asking seemingly innocent questions designed to reveal inconsistencies in Claire's various stories about herself. I started by asking about her travel blog and the exotic locations she'd supposedly visited for content creation. Her answers were vague and contradictory, heavy on general descriptions that could have been pulled from travel websites rather than personal experience. When Dad asked specific questions about photographic techniques she'd used in different lighting conditions, her responses revealed a fundamental lack of understanding about actual travel photography challenges. More damaging was her reaction to Mom's questions about her family and background. Claire had apparently created an elaborate fictional history involving successful parents and private education, but her details didn't hold up under gentle scrutiny. She claimed her father was a successful businessman, but couldn't specify his industry or company. She mentioned attending private school, but couldn't name specific teachers or programs when Mom tried to connect over shared educational experiences. Ryan was clearly becoming uncomfortable with these inconsistencies, though I could see him trying to rationalize them rather than questioning Claire directly. She'd done such an effective job of making him emotionally dependent on her approval that he was more willing to doubt his own perceptions than to acknowledge problems with her credibility. The turning point came when Claire's phone rang during dinner. She glanced at the screen and immediately declined the call, but not before I caught sight of the name. Landlord, urgent. Her face went pale, and she quickly tucked the phone away while claiming it was just a telemarketer. But the phone rang again, 5 minutes later, and this time she felt compelled to answer. She walked away from our campfire to take the call, but the quiet evening air carried her voice clearly back to where we were sitting. We could hear her pleading for more time, promising payment by the end of the month, insisting that her financial situation was about to improve dramatically. When she returned to the fire, her confident facade had cracked visibly. She claimed the call was about a minor billing issue, but her hands were shaking and she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Ryan looked concerned and confused, clearly recognizing that something serious was wrong but not understanding what he just overheard. I decided this was the moment to press my advantage. I began asking more direct questions about her living situation, her income from the lifestyle blog, her plans for covering the expensive camping gear she'd purchased. Each question revealed another layer of deception, another story that didn't align with her supposed success and financial stability. Claire's responses became increasingly defensive and contradictory. She claimed to be between major sponsorship deals that would solve all her current financial challenges. She insisted that her blog was on the verge of explosive growth that would generate substantial income. She hinted at family money that would soon be available to support her lifestyle ambitions. But most revealing was how she began deflecting these questions by pivoting to discussions of her future with Ryan. She spoke about their partnership as if it were a business arrangement rather than a romantic relationship, emphasizing how their combined resources and skills would create opportunities neither could achieve alone. She made references to shared financial planning and joint investments that clearly made Ryan uncomfortable, since they'd never had such conversations. The final confrontation began when Claire's phone buzzed with a text message that she read while thinking no one was paying attention. Whatever the message said drained the color from her face completely. She stood up abruptly and announced that she needed to make an important call, walking far enough from our campsite that we couldn't overhear her conversation. Ryan immediately wanted to follow her and offer support, but I convinced him to give her space while suggesting this might be a good time for us to have a private conversation about his relationship. I'd been waiting all weekend for an opportunity to speak with him honestly, away from Claire's constant presence and emotional manipulation. We walked down to the lake shore, where the evening light was creating the kind of natural beauty that had always helped Ryan think clearly about important decisions. I started by expressing my concerns about the pace of his relationship with Claire, emphasizing that I wanted him to be happy but worried he was moving too fast with someone we didn't really know very well. Ryan's initial response was predictably defensive. He insisted that Claire understood him in ways nobody else ever had, that she appreciated his artistic vision and supported his career ambitions more effectively than anyone in his past. But as we talked, I could see doubt beginning to creep into his certainty. The inconsistencies he'd noticed during the camping trip, combined with the obvious financial stress Claire was experiencing, were making it harder for him to maintain the idealized version of their relationship that she'd constructed. He admitted that some of her stories about her background didn't quite add up, and that her suggestions about their future sometimes felt more like business proposals than romantic planning. Most importantly, he acknowledged that he missed aspects of his life that had changed since Claire became such a dominant presence. He missed his weekly basketball games with Marcus, his solitary hiking expeditions, and his comfortable relationship with our parents before Claire began positioning herself as an intermediary for family communication. This admission opened the door for me to share some of what I'd discovered about Claire's actual circumstances, though I was careful to present the information as concerns rather than accusations. I mentioned Stephanie's observations about Claire's financial struggles and her systematic research into Ryan's background before their introduction. I described the inconsistencies between her public social media persona and her actual lifestyle. Ryan listened with growing alarm, clearly recognizing the patterns I was describing even as he struggled to accept their implications. The woman he'd fallen in love with was apparently a carefully constructed fiction, designed to exploit his emotional vulnerabilities and financial potential. Before he could fully process this information, we heard Claire calling his name from the direction of our campsite. Her voice carried a note of panic that suggested whatever phone call she'd made had not gone well. We walked back to find her packing her belongings with frantic urgency while my parents watched in confused concern. "I'm so sorry," she announced to the group, her composure finally cracking completely. "There's been an emergency with my apartment. I need to get back to Portland immediately to deal with a situation that can't wait until Monday." The emergency, she claimed, involved a water leak that required her immediate presence to prevent extensive damage. But her explanation was rushed and contradictory, and she avoided eye contact while delivering it. More telling was how she seemed desperate to leave before Ryan could ask too many questions or offer to accompany her back to the city. Ryan, still processing our conversation, looked uncertain about whether to go with her or stay with the family. This hesitation clearly frustrated Claire, who began making increasingly desperate attempts to secure his commitment to their relationship before departing. She spoke about their future plans, their creative partnership, and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. But something had shifted in Ryan's perception during our lakeside conversation. Instead of immediately offering to sacrifice his family time to support her crisis, he suggested that she handle the apartment emergency while he finished the camping trip as planned. They could reconnect when he returned to Portland and discuss whatever was troubling her in a calmer environment. Claire's reaction to this reasonable suggestion revealed the depth of her desperation. She became argumentative and accusatory, suggesting that Ryan didn't truly care about her well-being if he was willing to let her handle a crisis alone. She implied that his family was deliberately interfering with their relationship and trying to undermine their commitment to each other. This emotional manipulation tactic had probably worked effectively in the past, making Ryan feel guilty for maintaining boundaries or prioritizing other relationships. But having just discussed these patterns with me, he recognized the manipulation for what it was. Instead of capitulating to her demands, he calmly restated his position while expressing genuine concern for whatever was troubling her. The standoff continued for 20 uncomfortable minutes, with Claire becoming increasingly desperate and Ryan becoming increasingly certain that something fundamental was wrong with their entire relationship. Finally, she demanded that he choose between supporting her immediately or accepting that their partnership meant nothing to him. This ultimatum was the final strategic mistake that destroyed whatever remaining influence she had over him. Ryan had never responded well to emotional blackmail, and being forced to choose between his family and a girlfriend of less than 2 months clarified his priorities instantly. He told Claire that he cared about her well-being and wanted to help with whatever crisis she was facing, but that he wouldn't be manipulated into abandoning his family commitments or making relationship decisions under pressure. If she needed to return to Portland immediately, he respected that choice, but he would be staying to finish the camping trip as planned. Claire stared at him for a long moment, clearly realizing that her control over the situation had evaporated. Without the leverage of Ryan's emotional dependence, she had no way to force the outcome she needed. Her apartment crisis was apparently real and urgent, but her ability to use it as a tool for securing his commitment had backfired completely. She gathered her belongings and accepted Dad's offer to drive her to the nearest town where she could arrange transportation back to Portland. But before leaving, she made one final attempt to salvage her position by privately asking Ryan to call her as soon as he returned to the city. She needed to explain things properly, she said, away from family interference and misunderstandings. Ryan agreed to this conversation, though I could see he was already preparing himself for revelations that would likely end their relationship entirely. The camping trip had shattered his illusions about Claire's character and motivations, leaving him ready to hear truths he'd been psychologically unable to process just days earlier. After she left, our family spent the rest of the weekend processing what had happened and supporting Ryan through his realization that he'd been systematically manipulated by someone he'd trusted completely. The healing process would take time, but the immediate crisis had passed. Claire's desperate attempt to use our family camping trip as a setting for securing Ryan's commitment had instead provided the perfect environment for exposing her deception and freeing him from her psychological control. The drive back to Portland on Sunday evening was subdued, marked by the kind of reflective silence that follows significant revelations. Ryan sat in the passenger seat of Dad's SUV, staring out the window at the passing landscape while processing everything that had unfolded during the weekend. The transformation in his demeanor was profound. The anxious, people-pleasing energy that had characterized his behavior for weeks had been replaced by something calmer but sadder, as if he was mourning the loss of someone who had never actually existed. Mom kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror with the concerned expression she'd worn when we were children and had scraped our knees or suffered playground disappointments. But this wasn't a wound that could be healed with bandages and ice cream. This was the deeper injury that comes from discovering that someone you trusted had viewed you as nothing more than an opportunity to exploit. When we reached my parents' house, Ryan helped unload the camping equipment with mechanical efficiency, his mind clearly elsewhere. As we sorted through sleeping bags and camp stoves in the garage, he finally spoke the words I'd been waiting to hear. "I need to see her apartment," he said quietly. "I need to understand what's real and what isn't, before I can have any kind of conversation with her." I offered to accompany him, knowing that facing Claire's deception alone might be overwhelming, but Ryan shook his head. This was something he needed to do independently, a necessary step in reclaiming his ability to trust his own perceptions about people and situations. He drove to Claire's building that evening and called me an hour later, his voice hollow with the exhaustion that comes from having your reality completely rewritten. The stylish downtown loft she described was indeed a cramped studio apartment in a converted warehouse, furnished with second-hand pieces and showing obvious signs of financial strain. Her expensive camping gear was piled in a corner, still bearing store tags that revealed she'd purchased everything within the past week. More damaging to whatever remained of his trust in her was what he'd observed about her living situation. The apartment was clearly shared with Stephanie, despite Claire's claims of living independently. Empty wine bottles and takeout containers filled the small space, contradicting her social media posts about home-cooked gourmet meals and sophisticated entertaining. Most revealing were the notebooks and printed documents scattered across her desk, pages of research about Ryan's family, our financial circumstances, and strategic notes about how to integrate herself into our social circle. She'd been studying us like a business opportunity, analyzing our relationships and vulnerabilities with the thoroughness of someone preparing for a complex negotiation. Ryan found detailed timelines tracking his daily routines, lists of his friends and their potential influence on his decision-making, and financial projections calculating his likely inheritance and earning potential under her management. The clinical nature of this documentation was perhaps more devastating than outright hostility would have been. Claire hadn't hated him or wanted to hurt him. She'd simply viewed him as a resource to be optimized for her benefit. The confrontation, when it finally came on Monday afternoon, unfolded at Brew and Bean downtown, the same coffee shop where they'd had their first extended conversation weeks earlier. Claire had spent the intervening time crafting explanations for her weekend emergency and preparing emotional appeals designed to restore her influence over Ryan's decision-making. But she arrived to find a fundamentally changed man. The eager, grateful person who had once hung on her every word had been replaced by someone who looked at her with careful assessment rather than automatic trust. She immediately recognized that something crucial had shifted, though she initially misread the situation as temporary upset rather than permanent transformation. Her opening strategy involved elaborate explanations for her apartment crisis, complete with photos of water damage and documentation of repair estimates. She positioned herself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances who needed Ryan's support and understanding during a difficult period. This approach had probably worked effectively in past manipulations, generating sympathy and protective instincts from her targets. Ryan listened politely to her explanations, then began asking specific questions about the inconsistencies that had become apparent during the camping trip. Why had she claimed extensive outdoor experience while clearly struggling with basic camping tasks? How could she afford expensive equipment while apparently facing eviction? What exactly was the nature of her travel blog's success if she was having trouble paying rent? Claire's responses revealed the depth of her desperation. She began spinning increasingly elaborate stories to explain away each contradiction, creating new layers of deception to cover the ones that were crumbling. She claimed her financial difficulties were temporary, the result of delayed payments from major sponsors who would soon be funding substantial lifestyle improvements. She insisted her camping struggles were due to recent injuries that had affected her outdoor abilities. Each explanation only highlighted how thoroughly she'd been lying about fundamental aspects of her life and circumstances. Ryan found himself talking to a complete stranger, someone whose entire personality had apparently been constructed to appeal to his specific vulnerabilities and desires. The conversation reached its turning point when Claire realized that her usual emotional manipulation tactics weren't working. Sensing that she was losing control of the narrative, she pivoted to the strategy that had originally secured Ryan's attention: appeals to his artistic ego and creative potential. She began describing elaborate plans for their professional collaboration, painting pictures of gallery exhibitions and commercial success that could only be achieved through their partnership. She positioned herself as the business mind behind his creative talent, the strategic thinking he needed to transform his artistic gifts into substantial financial rewards. But this approach backfired spectacularly because it confirmed everything Ryan had begun to suspect about her motivations. She wasn't interested in his art. She was interested in monetizing it. She didn't appreciate his creative vision. She wanted to commodify it. The person he'd believed understood his artistic soul better than anyone else was actually someone who viewed his talents as unexploited assets in need of proper management. Ryan's response was quiet and devastating. He told Claire that he finally understood what their relationship had actually been, and it wasn't what he'd believed he was experiencing. He'd thought they were building something genuine together, but she'd been executing a business plan that treated him as a means to an end, rather than a person worthy of authentic love and respect. Claire's reaction to this confrontation revealed layers of her personality that she'd kept hidden throughout their entire relationship. Faced with the collapse of her careful strategy, she abandoned the loving, supportive persona that had won Ryan's trust and revealed someone calculating, entitled, and genuinely angry at being denied what she'd worked so hard to secure. She accused him of being naive and ungrateful, suggesting that his family had poisoned him against her because they were jealous of her success and threatened by her influence. She claimed he was throwing away the best opportunity he'd ever have for professional advancement because he couldn't handle being with someone who challenged him to grow. This emotional assault might have been effective weeks earlier, when Ryan was still dependent on her validation and approval. But having recognized the manipulative patterns in her behavior, he could see this outburst for what it was: a final, desperate attempt to regain control through intimidation and emotional blackmail. He ended the conversation by thanking her for teaching him important lessons about trusting his instincts and valuing his existing relationships. Then he walked away, leaving Claire alone at the coffee shop with the wreckage of her carefully constructed deception. The aftermath of their breakup provided additional confirmation of Claire's true character. Within hours of their confrontation, she began posting dramatic social media content about being betrayed by someone she'd trusted, painting herself as the victim of manipulation and family interference. She deleted all photos that included Ryan from her accounts and began crafting a new narrative about toxic relationships and lessons learned about people who couldn't handle successful, independent women. More concerning was her attempt to maintain connections with our family members, reaching out to my parents with carefully worded messages about how much she'd enjoyed getting to know them and hoped they wouldn't let Ryan's emotional immaturity affect their opinion of her. She clearly hoped to preserve options for future manipulation or to gather information she could use against Ryan somehow. These efforts backfired completely. My parents had witnessed her behavior during the camping trip and recognized her outreach as additional manipulation rather than genuine sentiment. They politely but firmly declined further contact, making it clear that their loyalty was with their son, rather than someone who had demonstrated such calculating behavior toward him. The healing process for Ryan took several months, though the most difficult aspect wasn't missing Claire herself, but rather mourning the relationship he'd believed they had. He'd fallen in love with a carefully constructed fiction, and accepting that none of it had been genuine required him to question his ability to read people and situations accurately. He returned to therapy, something he'd abandoned during his relationship with Claire, ostensibly because she'd convinced him that she provided better emotional support than professional counseling ever could. Working with a therapist helped him understand how his recent breakup had made him vulnerable to someone who offered exactly the kind of validation and appreciation he'd been craving. More importantly, therapy helped him recognize that his existing support system, family, longtime friends, creative colleagues, had always provided the understanding and encouragement that Claire had convinced him he was missing. She hadn't given him anything new. She'd simply repackaged what was already available to him, while gradually isolating him from those genuine sources of support. Ryan's photography work underwent an interesting evolution during this period. His images became more introspective and emotionally complex, as if processing the deception had deepened his understanding of human nature and interpersonal dynamics. He began exploring themes of authenticity versus performance, the difference between genuine connection and strategic manipulation. One series in particular, which he titled Masks, featured portraits of people in moments when they thought they were unobserved, capturing expressions that revealed their true selves rather than their public personas. The work was powerful and honest in ways that attracted attention from local galleries and art collectors, who appreciated his mature perspective on human complexity. This artistic development led to opportunities that were far more meaningful than the commercial success Claire had promised to orchestrate. Ryan's work began appearing in group exhibitions focused on contemporary portraiture, and he received commissions from clients who appreciated his ability to capture authentic moments rather than manufactured perfection. Perhaps most importantly, he began dating again about 6 months after the Claire situation ended, but with a completely different approach to relationships. Instead of desperately seeking validation from partners, he focused on finding someone who appreciated him as he already was, rather than someone who wanted to transform him into their ideal version of success. The woman he eventually became serious about was Anna Martinez, a librarian who'd been attending the same hiking group that Ryan rejoined after Claire's influence ended. Anna was quiet, thoughtful, and completely uninterested in social media or public displays of affection. She loved Ryan's photography for its emotional honesty rather than its commercial potential, and she supported his artistic development without trying to manage or direct it. Most tellingly, Anna integrated naturally into our family gatherings without effort or calculation. She didn't need to research our interests or manufacture common ground. She simply enjoyed our company and contributed to conversations without always steering them toward herself. The contrast with Claire's performative approach to family relationships was stark and reassuring. The annual camping trip to Crater Lake the following year became a celebration of Ryan's recovery and growth, rather than a source of anxiety about unwelcome intrusions. Anna joined us easily, helping with practical tasks without complaint, and appreciating the natural beauty of the location without immediately photographing everything for social media documentation. Watching Ryan with Anna confirmed that his relationship with Claire had been an aberration rather than a pattern. With someone who genuinely cared about his well-being, he was relaxed, confident, and generous in ways that brought out the best aspects of his personality. The anxious people-pleasing that had characterized his behavior with Claire disappeared entirely. Claire herself gradually faded from our awareness, though occasional social media updates revealed that she'd moved on to targeting other creative men who appeared vulnerable to her particular brand of manipulation. Her lifestyle blog eventually disappeared, replaced by various attempts at building online businesses that promised to help other women find financial security through strategic relationship choices. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that Claire's actual talents seemed to lie in the very manipulation tactics she'd used on Ryan. She could have probably built a successful consulting business helping people improve their dating profiles or social media presence. Instead, she continued pursuing the fantasy of finding a wealthy partner who would fund the affluent lifestyle she craved without requiring her to develop genuine skills or contribute meaningful value. For our family, the Claire experience became a cautionary tale about the importance of trusting instincts about people whose behavior doesn't align with their stated intentions. We'd all noticed things that bothered us about her, but social politeness and desire to support Ryan's happiness had prevented us from speaking up until the damage was already extensive. The situation taught us that genuine love enhances rather than isolates people from their existing support systems. When someone is truly good for your family member, they add value to existing relationships, rather than competing with them or attempting to replace them entirely. Most importantly, we learned that protecting people you care about sometimes requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable confrontations. My hesitation to challenge Claire earlier had allowed her manipulation to continue far longer than necessary, causing additional psychological damage to Ryan that could have been prevented with more direct intervention. The experience ultimately strengthened, rather than damaged, our family relationships. Ryan's gratitude for our support during his recovery deepened his appreciation for the stability and consistency we'd always provided. He began participating more actively in family gatherings and maintaining closer contact with our parents, recognizing how valuable these connections were compared to the manufactured intimacy Claire had offered. Looking back, I realized that introducing Claire to Ryan had been one of those decisions that seemed harmless at the time, but created consequences none of us could have anticipated. Her systematic approach to manipulation was sophisticated enough that recognizing it required time and careful observation. By the time the patterns became clear, she'd already established significant psychological influence over someone we all cared about. But the experience also demonstrated the resilience of genuine relationships and the power of family support in helping people recover from manipulation and deception. Ryan's healing was possible because he had a foundation of authentic love and acceptance to return to once Claire's influence was removed. He knew what real support looked like, which eventually made it possible for him to recognize the counterfeit version she'd been providing. The story became one we told carefully to other family members and close friends, not as entertainment, but as education, about the subtle ways that manipulative people can infiltrate and damage healthy relationships. Claire's techniques had been refined through practice, suggesting she'd done similar things to other people in the past, and would likely continue doing so until someone held her accountable for the harm she caused. Our camping trips to Crater Lake continued as an annual tradition, but with renewed appreciation for the genuine connections and authentic experiences they represented. The pristine beauty of the lake and surrounding mountains served as a perfect counterpoint to the artificial complexity that Claire had brought into our lives. Nature doesn't perform or manipulate, it simply exists in honest beauty, which was exactly what we all needed after months of navigating someone else's calculated deceptions. Ryan's photography of these family gatherings captured something that had been missing from his work during the Claire period. Pure joy in simple moments, appreciation for authenticity over performance, and deep gratitude for relationships that didn't require constant maintenance or strategic management. His artistic vision had been clarified rather than damaged by the experience of recognizing and rejecting manipulation. The final chapter of the Claire story came almost 2 years later, when Ryan received a message from Marcus Thompson mentioning that he'd been approached by a woman who claimed to be researching Ryan's background for a potential photography commission. Marcus had recognized Claire from photos and immediately declined to provide any information about his friend's current circumstances or relationships. This attempt at renewed contact served as a reminder that people like Claire rarely accept permanent rejection of their influence. She was apparently still monitoring Ryan's life somehow, possibly hoping to find an opportunity to reinsert herself when he might be more vulnerable, or when enough time had passed for her previous deception to seem less significant. Ryan blocked all her social media accounts and asked mutual acquaintances to refrain from sharing any information about his personal or professional activities with her. This final boundary setting marked his complete recovery from her psychological influence and his commitment to preventing any future manipulation attempts. The experience taught all of us that protecting ourselves and the people we love requires ongoing vigilance rather than single decisive actions. Manipulative people are persistent and creative in their approaches, often returning after significant time has passed to test whether their previous targets have maintained their defenses. But it also demonstrated that recovery from manipulation is not only possible but can lead to stronger, healthier relationships and better judgment about people's true intentions. Ryan's marriage to Anna 3 years later was a celebration of authentic love triumphing over calculated deception, genuine compatibility defeating manufactured connection, and family support proving more powerful than individual manipulation. As I watched my brother dance with his wife at their wedding reception, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness rather than what they could gain from it, I felt profound gratitude that we'd all survived Claire's intrusion into our lives with our relationships intact, and our trust in authentic love strengthened rather than destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.